Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing craft and creative business. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn, and this is episode number 774 of the podcast, and it is Saturday the 5th of October 2024 as I record this, with a bit of a cough, hence the husky voice. In today's show, I'm talking about author mindset, writing and marketing nonfiction with Ariel Curry. We discuss the mindset needed for a successful author career, no matter the genre, why you need to shift your viewpoint to that of your target market in order to write a book that satisfies them, the key elements of a book map and how you might use it as a plotter or a discovery writer, aspects of platform, and much more. So that's coming up in the interview section. In writing and publishing things, do you struggle with imposter syndrome? It's definitely common to many authors and something I've definitely struggled with often when I go to events and just feel like, how am I here? But when will we ever be good enough? This is one of those questions. Rachel Herron tackles this topic on her podcast, Ink in Your Veins, this week in an interview with poet Lynn Thompson. They recommend embracing imperfection, being kinder to yourself, and also giving yourself permission to succeed. You have to acknowledge that imposter syndrome and do it anyway. So yes, if you're at an event and you're like, I don't believe I should be here, I'm not good enough to be here, then just kind of shrug that off and do it anyway. Submit your work, do that talk, publish that book, and don't let your own self-absorption get you off track. In some tough love, Lynn says she gets bored with herself sometimes, saying, "Are you still whining? Just get over yourself, move on. It is what it is. Have you done your best? Have you really done your best? If you phoned it in, then you can beat yourself up, but if not, you've done your best. Move on." And they also talk more in depth about writing poetry, which is always wonderful to hear. So that's the Ink in Your Veins podcast, wherever you're listening to this. Also, if you'd like to improve your craft and your author business in the coming months, I have 3 useful things for you. First of all, if you want to improve your writing craft in fiction, my editor, Kristen Tate, has a new book out. It's called Novel Study, Decoding the Secrets and Structures of Contemporary Fiction, which includes how to write a great opening chapter, maximize suspense, managing multiple point of view characters, writing immersive setting, dialogue, and much more. So that is Novel Study, Decoding the Secrets and Structures of Contemporary Fiction by Kristen Tate. There's also a great new story bundle for writers out, and this is for a limited time. Storybundle.com/writing. It includes books on dictation, self-editing, mindset, as well as author branding, professional speaking, making money from your books, and more. That's at storybundle.com/writing. And finally, the Self-Publishing Advice Conference online from the Alliance of Independent Authors is coming soon, the 19th to the 20th of October 2024. It is free to join live. And the topic this time is publishing for profit. So that is the focus of the conference. You can watch live for free or you can purchase a ticket to download the sessions later. Sessions include maximizing profit with Ingram Spark, automating book sales, YouTube strategies, working with influencers, building a community, frugal author tips, licensing translations, and the profitable writer, and many more. Go and have a look at what is going to be happening and whether you're interested in some of those sessions. I think there's something for everyone, really. Go to selfpublishingadviceconference.com/24. selfpublishingadviceconference.com/24. Also, I just wanted to follow up on the interview with Mark Leslie Lefebvre about selling in person, which was a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about using the Square device to take to events. PayPal just announced this week a service called Tap to Pay on mobile using the Zettle app. So you basically get the Zettle app, which is owned by PayPal, and then you can take contactless payments with cards and mobile devices directly on your phone. There is no need for extra equipment. So this is definitely a very interesting development. I haven't tried it, but I've put it on my list because I just saw that buying another device, like a Square device, was another barrier to doing in-person sales. But this looks very interesting. So you can find out more at zettle.com tap to pay. I'll put a link in the show notes. But if having another device was holding you back, maybe this is the way forward. In AI things, on the Brave New Bookshelf podcast last week, Mallory Cooper talks about leveraging AI for book covers and ads. Many of you will know Mallory from The Writing Wives, and she has over 130 books to her name, mainly in military, sci-fi and space opera. She also teaches Facebook ads. In the discussion with Danica and Steph, they all discuss how using AI for images is democratizing book covers and ads, especially for those who are marginalized and those who are not represented in stock photo libraries. And I mean, that is a lot of people. Mallory loves Midjourney, which I also use as my primary AI image tool. I'm actually starting to make some Amazon A+ content with Midjourney. I've been doing that this week. She says, the real purpose behind art is to share and to enrich humanity as a whole, and technology has every step of the way just made that easier and better for all of us. It is a great discussion. There are lots of interviews now on Brave New Bookshelf on all the different ways authors are using AI tools. Most of these authors are not using AI to write final finished words for publishing. And as we know, there are so many ways to use the tools. I keep trying to remind people that AI, like the word AI, the letters AI, is like internet. It has absolutely no meaning on its own anymore. Internet encompasses so many sites and functions and tools and processes, and AI is similar now. It is everything AI does not go in one box, like everything internet does not go in one box. So go and have a listen to Brave New Bookshelf wherever you're listening to this and get some ideas. Also on useful tools, many of you emailed and messaged about Google Notebook LM, which I mentioned last week, and how useful and fun you're finding it. In an article on VentureBeat this week, the team at Google confirm they will be expanding the capabilities and responding to suggestions. There will be options to choose the voices soon for the custom audio as well as the language. That is so cool. I actually think I might use the language thing more than in English, because in English I can do things with my own voice, but I certainly cannot do it in French or Spanish or any other language, in fact. You'll also be able to direct it more, ask follow-up questions, so keep an eye on that, Google Notebook LM. There have been lots of releases in AI this week, and Microsoft and OpenAI, so I'm not going to talk about all of those. What I am going to mention is Meta's generative video model, MovieGen, which is one to watch since so many authors do Facebook ads, and this is text to video, like Runway ML, which is what I use to do the book trailer for Blood Vintage. Over a year ago, Mark Zuckerberg talked about the future state of ads, where you would just put in a link and they would generate everything for it. Well, I think this is another step towards that. The videos are impressive, so you can check them out, ai.meta.com. Check it out. MovieGen is their new model for video, for text to video. So you write the text and it generates video. Impersonal news. I am on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast this week. The first part is out now as this goes out, and there's a second part where I talk with wine writer Natalie McLean about how 2 English vineyards inspired Blood Vintage. We also have a wide-ranging discussion about New Zealand and also English wines, some of the unusual practices of biodynamics, Somerset folklore, and Somerset is the area I live in England, how terroir is so important to wine and writing, and much more. It was one of the most fun interviews I have done, possibly ever, and that might be partly because Natalie and I both had a glass of wine during the discussion, because part of her interview process is a discussion of wine and some tasting. I'm not particularly good at tasting, but I certainly enjoyed my glass of rosé from the Woodchester vineyard, which is where the idea originally came from. So you can listen to that interview wherever you're listening to this. Just search Unreserved Wine Talk Podcast. You can watch the entire interview on YouTube, which is quite fun to see us both having a chat and swigging our wine. I was swigging anyway. Natalie was sipping. It was a Friday night for me. I have a transcript with pictures on my booksandtravel.page blog, so you can have a look there. Links to all of that in the show notes, or just search Unreserved Wine Talk Podcast. I'm also on the Nightmare Engine podcast coming up this week with David Viergoots, where we geek out about folk horror and why we love the genre. So the Kickstarter for Blood Vintage went live last week and funded within the first few hours. So thanks to everyone who has backed the campaign. You will be getting a gorgeous hardback and you'll be able to read Blood Vintage well before anyone else. Lots of people have asked about the other formats, but no, there is no ebook, no audiobook, no paperback, no large print, nothing except the hardback is available. There's also some bundles and other things, but no other formats of the book. Essentially, it's out on submission. It is with my agent in the US. The plan is to get a deal for this. But if not, I will self-publish the rest of the formats. It's more a question of when the book is out. So also lots of people have said to me, oh, I don't read horror. But folk horror is not slasher gore. It is slow burn suspense. It has an eerie sense of place, deeply embedded in the land, which is why terroir is so interesting. And strange folklore. Natalie McLean, as I mentioned, the host, wine writer, read it, and she found that she liked the genre after never reading horror before, and essentially was surprised by what it wasn't, I suppose. So have a listen to our discussion. You can also watch the book trailer, read more about it at jfpenn.com/bloodvintage. Also in the campaign are tickets for my discovery writing webinar, which I'll run live in November. Lots of authors enjoyed it last time. A couple of writers, Jennifer said, you jump-started the dead engine in my head and got me moving again, which I'm thrilled about. And Becky said, I feel renewed and look forward to writing again. This workshop has allowed me to begin to crumble the structured wall that has been built from numerous writing programs and their lists of rules. So yes, I discovery write, and in that webinar, it's a 2-hour live webinar, or you can register to get the replay, but it's definitely good to come along live. I run it in 2 different time zones, so you should be able to attend wherever you are in the world, and we write together. I do a bit of teaching and then we do a bit of writing, and I've actually got some great ideas from doing the webinar myself. I sit there and also write, so it is a chance to come and write with me. You can get that webinar at jfpenn.com/bloodvintage, available until 15th of October 2024. So thanks for your emails and comments and photos this week. Corinne said, I really enjoyed the episode with Mark, but this time, and this was on selling at live events, but this time it really spoke to a movement I've been noticing for some time and seems to have come to a tipping point. Mark's message about the priceless power of in-person connection joins a storm of voices I've been hearing across multiple domains in my private and professional life. A return to analog. When you start to hear the same advice everywhere, it might be time to do something about it. I'll be dipping my toes into selling print books at live events starting in 2025. Thanks to Michelle, who sent a video of listening in her car, pulling her RV and driving with her dog, exercising or paddling or just in my home office. It was very cool. Lots of different places where Michelle listens. Thank you. And SK Randolph sent a smiley picture holding her book with the backdrop of boats in Sealing Cove Harbour in Sitka, Alaska. I have not been to Alaska. It is on my list. It's one of my very long list of places to visit. SK is celebrating the 13th anniversary of the release of her first self-published book and is about to drop the 8th in the series. I left decades of a creative career to carry on storytelling in retirement through writing and illustrating. Fantastic. Okay, you can leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel or wherever you're listening. You can message me on X at thecreativepenn or email me. Send me pictures of where you're listening. Joanna@thecreativepenn.com. I love to hear from you. It makes this more of a conversation. Today's show is sponsored by Findaway Voices by Spotify, the platform for independent authors who want to unlock the world's largest audiobook platforms. With no upfront cost, you can distribute your audiobooks globally to nearly 40 retailers and library services, including Spotify, Audible, Apple Books, Google Play, and more. Findaway Voices also gives you total control over your retail and library pricing, and you keep 100% of your royalties on Spotify and 80% everywhere else. I've been using Findaway Voices by Spotify to publish my audiobooks wide for years now, and every single one of my audiobooks goes through Findaway Voices, both full-length fiction and non-fiction, as well as novellas and short stories, and also things I narrate myself and also that I pay other professionals for. I love how easy it is to upload my audiobook files, choose distribution platforms, set my pricing, as well as take advantage of promotional pricing opportunities on Spotify, Apple, and Chirp Books. And in fact, just this week, I got selected for a Chirp promo, Freebie Friday. So Stone of Fire will be free in the audiobook version, with a few other books in the series reduced during the promotion. Being wide with audio makes it so much easier to do these kinds of promotions as you control the pricing. And remember, you can apply for these kind of promotions for Chirp books through BookBub. I also find the reporting dashboard useful on Findaway, where I can see sales and library borrows, royalty reports and payments, as well as aggregated demographic data about Spotify premium listeners who have listened to my audiobooks. I find that absolutely fascinating. You can actually get a glimpse into who your listeners are for which books. So take your audiobook everywhere to earn everywhere with Findaway Voices by Spotify. Go to findawayvoices.com/Penn, Penn, to publish your next audiobook project. That's findawayvoices.com/Penn. This type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription, and editing, but my time in creating the show is sponsored by my community at patreon.com, patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Thanks to the 16 new patrons who've joined this week, and thanks to everyone who's been supporting the show for months and years. If you join the community, you get access to everything, all my backlist videos and audio covering topics on creativity, mindset, business, publishing, marketing, AI, and my patron-only Q&A solo episodes. And I'll also be doing office hours this week, a live Q&A for patrons. The Patreon is a monthly subscription, the equivalent of buying me a black coffee a month or a couple of coffees if you're feeling generous. You get access to everything, all the backlist content. So if you get value from the show and you want more, come on over and join us at patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Right, let's get into the interview. Ariel Curry is a writer, editor, and book coach, and the co-author of Hungry Authors, the indispensable guide to planning, writing, and publishing a non-fiction book. So welcome to the show, Ariel.
Thank you so much for having me, Joanna. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. Well, first up, tell us a bit more about you and how you got into writing and the publishing industry.
Sure. Well, like many people in the publishing industry, I was an English major who didn't really know what she wanted to do. I thought I might do teaching. I tried that for a little bit. That did not go well. So I thought, you know what? Well, why not just shoot for the stars? And I've always loved books. And so I thought, well, it never hurts to apply to publishing internships. So I did that. I got an internship actually in London at Anthem Press, which is a little bit more of an academic publisher. And that eventually led to a role as an editorial assistant at Corwin Press in California. And then from there, I moved up the ladder to acquisitions editor. And I took a little bit of a break from the traditional publishing kind of corporate world for a few years. And I was freelancing, I was doing collaborations, and I was doing developmental editing. And then just recently, I decided to rejoin the corporate publishing industry, and I took a role as an acquisitions editor at Sourcebooks. So that's where I am currently, and I specialize in nonfiction.
So what is it like being on the other side of the fence?
It is a lot of fun. The thing that I always remind authors of is it's a business. So my job there is to be an investor in great ideas and great writers and great writing. And I think that's the part that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. And sometimes it's a little sad because it seems to take some of the romance and the feelings of creativity out of it, I think. But At the end of the day, everyone in the publishing industry just truly loves books. And so we totally get the romance and the special feelings that come with pouring everything that you have into a book. Someone has to be the person to make it successful on a broad scale. And that's what people in the publishing industry are here to do, is to take the very, very, very best of writers and writing and help to blast that hopefully as wide an audience as possible. That's what we're all here to do. Sometimes it takes a little bit of the romance away, but honestly, I absolutely love what I do. I love working in the corporate publishing sphere. So I don't see that going away anytime soon.
That's great. Well, let's get into the book, because I think it is good to know of your background too, for nonfiction authors in particular, we're really talking about today, but to know the mindset of a acquisitions editor, I think is great. But getting into the book, what is your definition of a hungry author, and why is mindset so important?
Yes. So here's our official definition of a hungry author. We say a hungry author is a writer who is determined to succeed. They want to and will be published. They take feedback well and don't shy away from the hard work. You will find their butts in the chairs and fingers on the keyboard. They believe in their ideas and they know they will impact others. So we wanted to write this book and we called it Hungry Authors because my co-author Liz Morrow and she is a full-time collaborator. She's a ghostwriter. And obviously, I work in acquisitions, and we just saw every single day that authors, even with small to no platform, which is the thing that everyone says you have to have, but authors with little to no platforms still can and do all the time reach kind of the pinnacles of publishing success, right? Like if you look at the New York Times bestseller list, you will often find authors that you cannot find on social media. And we were like, what is it about those people? How do they break the code or go against the grain of all of this advice that we typically hear that, oh, you have to, especially for nonfiction, you've got to have a great platform, you've got to be a celebrity. There's all of these myths around what you have to be or have to make it and to succeed as a traditionally published author. And we know from both of our experience that that's not necessarily true. And as she and I both started working with more clients who were doing that, who were getting traditional book deals, who were self-publishing their books to great success, we were like, what is it that makes these authors so different? And on the reverse, the opposite end, why is it that some authors with huge platforms can publish a book and it's a total flop? And we thought, and we've realized it's their mindset. Hungry authors are determined that they're going to make it happen no matter what. And it's that gumption and determination and grit that compels them to succeed. And those are the kinds of authors that, especially as an acquisitions editor, I'm like, I want to work with someone like that, because if I have confidence and I can see that they are determined to succeed and to make it work, and they're working as hard as they can to make it happen, then I have more confidence in them and I want to go wherever they're going. So that's what we wanted to encourage authors with, is to have that gumption and to embody that determination.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. And it's interesting. I first self-published in 2007. And in the last, however many years, almost 16, 17 years, whatever it is, there have been so many authors who I've seen along the way who have left the industry. Like and it's one of the things I've asked often is, how do you have a long-term career as an author? And this comes up over and over again, this grit, resilience, bouncing back, trying again. You're calling it being hungry, I guess, being hungry for it. But it's almost like, just keeping going. And it might not happen with the first book or the second book, or it might, I guess, I will often think it might not ever happen. You might not ever hit the New York Times list or whatever. But if you're creating the books you want to create in the world and you're making the impact you want to make, then that's what keeps you going. So I guess this is important for longevity as well. You must see this in the industry.
Yes, that's right. In fact, in chapter 1 of our book, we've got 5 tenets or 5 components of the hungry author's mindset. And one of them is, this book is just my first book or my second book or my third book, but I will write more books. That longevity piece of it is really vital. And to me, that's almost the most important component of the hungry author's mindset, because that that component says, I'm in it for me. I'm in it for the belief that I have in my own writing. It's for the determination and the commitment I feel to serving my readers. So when you have your why aligned in that way, when you really know I'm in it for the journey and not necessarily the destination, you will be able to keep going and to be resilient, and you'll have more success, ironically.
Yeah, that is ironic. And we'll come back to that because we are, in this approach, designing a book, but sometimes that doesn't work either. But let's just first define nonfiction, because I feel like it's quite a misunderstood term almost. There's so many subcategories. So can you talk a bit
Yes.
about what goes under this broad category of nonfiction?
Yes. So nonfiction are often super at the broadest level. Nonfiction are books that, as if it's a story, then it's grounded in reality and it's based on true events that actually happened, and usually can be factually proven, although sometimes in memoir, there aren't necessarily other sources that can verify the story, but certainly in narrative nonfiction, there are going to be primary sources and other things that you're using that would validate the story as you were telling it. And then it's also informational books. So in the story category, we've got the two primary genres are going to be narrative nonfiction, which are stories about real life people or places or even time periods where that thing is the subject of the story. Then you've got memoir, which is the author's own story about a situation or event in their life. On the informational side, you've got self-help, which is nonfiction that is directed towards a transformation in the reader's life. And then you've got thought leadership, which is a book that is meant to transform our society as a whole. So when I think of thought leadership books, I'm thinking of like Siddhartha Mukherjee or like Simon Sinek or the really big names that you hear about in these kind of groundbreaking books that expose, like I would say, Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxiety Generation, right? That's, or yeah, isn't it called The Anxiety Generation? Anxious Generation,
Something like that.
that. Yeah. That would be an example of a thought leadership book where his aim is really to kind of expose this part of our society and part of how the world works and what's happening in the zeitgeist right now and help us have a deeper understanding of that. He's not necessarily trying to change the reader at an individual level, although that may happen. But really the goal is more broad societal change for thought leadership books.
There would also potentially be the academic side. So, for example, a book on history, that's not either of those other things.
Right. Yes, that's true. And in the Hungry Authors book, we don't talk a lot about more reference books, but we kind of narrowed it down to what are the genres that people come to us for help with the most, and that kind of are the most like commercial nonfiction genres. But yes, there's certainly like history, there's reference books, there's even like professional development books in some more like niche categories. Like I used to work in education professional development. There's like books that are professional development for bankers or for finance experts or whatever. There's all kinds of nonfiction books that are in more niche categories as well.
Mm. Yeah, well, I think this gets to an important point. You mentioned the word commercial, and I feel like that is what a lot of beginning authors certainly forget about. And I was thinking back to when I wrote my first nonfiction book in 2007. I later rewrote it as Career Change, and I really thought it was for everyone. Like when people would say, "Oh, who's the book for?" and I'd be like, "Oh, it's for everyone." And it's like, I hear that. I still hear that. I'm sure you hear that. It's like, okay, this is a real issue with new authors, but can be an issue with established authors as well. So how can we identify our audience and our target market and use that to shape the book and the marketing?
Yeah, that's such a good question. You're right. It comes up all the time, and it plays into that genre factor that we were just talking about too. So we always tell authors to think about who would enjoy your book most or who would benefit most from your book. Start there with, if you can identify who, yes, maybe everyone could find some kind of way into your book, but who are the people who are going to see your book and just immediately think, oh my gosh, that is for me. I need that. And they're going to get the kind of maximum benefit out of it. think about those people. That's going to be your primary audience. And then if there are other audiences that might also benefit, but maybe to a little bit lesser extent, those are going to be your secondary or tertiary audiences. But it really, for me, starts with that question of who is going to enjoy my book the most or benefit from it the most. And we like to say, too, about audience, that you have to find your Goldilocks audience, because you don't want your audience to be too big. Because like you said, if it's too big, if you try to make something that's going to appeal to everyone, it's not going to deliver the maximum benefits for anyone. And so that's not going to be good, because no one is going to pick up your book and feel like, oh, this is for me, if you try to make it work for everyone. On the opposite side, you also don't want it to be so incredibly niche and specific that your audience is like 20 people. For example, I had someone come to me one time and say, okay, I want to write a book it was for Christian campus leaders who serve veterans with PTSD through paper craft making. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not joking there. That is a real story. And I was like, there are so many filters on your audience there that you're going to have. I mean, I would be shocked if we can find 5 Christian campus leaders who served military veterans with PTSD through paper craft making. I would just be shocked if we could find 5. Yeah, so that's clearly too small of an audience, right? So it has to be somewhere in between. And the right in between is going to look a little bit different depending on whatever your topic is. But you want to find enough people that you could sell a lot of books, but not so many people that your book doesn't appeal to anyone.
Yeah, it is really hard. I've written one memoir, which is called Pilgrimage. So even just the word, right, you're going to know either you're interested or you're not interested. And it's a solo travel book. And there are a lot of other intersecting audiences, but the title, I feel like, makes a big difference. I mean, like your book title, again, for nonfiction, a title and a good subtitle is really a good way, I guess, to niche down your audience.
Yes, definitely. As many authors do, when we were dreaming up the book that would become Hungry Authors, we did have a moment where we were like, well, should we just make this like really broad? Should we make it about finding your purpose or whatever? And we're like, hold on. We serve writers. That's who we can serve best and who would benefit the most from our work. And so we put some reins on our dreams for a minute. Maybe we'll branch out later in future books, but it is really important to really get clear on those questions. And yeah, the title has to reflect the people that you're trying to reach. And because they have to see your title and immediately go, ooh, that could be me, or I really want that transformation in my life.
Let's get into the book map, because you really emphasize mapping out a book before writing a draft. And I'm a discovery writer, so I find this challenging. But give us the key elements of what goes into a book map so people can kind of picture it. I know there's a lot in the book, but try and give us an overview.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the term discovery writer rather than pantsing.
Yeah, so American, right?
Yes. I think discovery writer really captures what you're trying to do so much better than pantsing. And to be fair, I do think that a book map can be helpful for discovery writers as well, almost as more of an intervention. So I have had authors come to me before and say, I wrote this, for lack of a better term, like word vomit type draft. I kind of poured out everything I know, but I know it's a mess and I don't know how to start organizing it. So I've got 60,000 words, but they're all a loose jumble of puzzle pieces, and I need you to help me create a picture from them. And so in those kinds of situations, I would also say a book map is super helpful for kind of imposing a structure even after the fact. After you've got all the puzzle pieces on the table, a book map is going to help you arrange those puzzle pieces into something that looks like a comprehensive and cohesive picture. So to answer your question, a book map is a visual depiction or visual representation of your book's content. And that can be a straightforward outline at its most basic level. Like in school, most of us learned how to make a super basic outline. And I would say that's the foundation of a book map, is the outline concepts. But we take that initial outlining so much further, because what we saw kept happening, is that authors would start writing, and even if they had created like a very vague table of contents, they're like, okay, I know I'm going to need an introduction. I know I'm going to need a chapter 1. They map out 10 chapters and a conclusion. And then they start writing and they still get stuck somewhere in like chapter 4, chapter 3, because they don't actually know what's going to go in those chapters. So sometimes we saw that a lot of authors, when they create a quote outline, they were really just identifying like topics for each supposed chapter. But as far as that kind of an outline did not give them a really clear pathway to how all of those pieces fit together, what is actually going to go in those chapters. And so what we do is start with identifying the transformation that you're trying to accomplish. If you're writing memoir, then you're trying to depict the transformation of yourself, your own transformation through an event or circumstance in your life. If you're writing a prescriptive nonfiction book, and that's going to be self-help or thought leadership, then you're trying to accomplish a transformation for the reader. So you start with, what is the transformation I'm trying to accomplish for the reader or for myself? Then you say, okay, what were kind of the big steps, or what are the big steps that need to happen to convey that transformation? So where am I starting? Where are we trying to end? And then what are all the big steps in between to get from beginning to end? And those big steps are typically going to be your chapters. From there, then you have to say, okay, for each chapter, what is like the little big idea that I'm trying to convey in that chapter? So often for prescriptive nonfiction, each chapter is going to have some kind of smaller argument that is going to contribute towards the reader's change in that towards that transformation. Then you have to say, okay, well, how do I defend that little argument? If chapter 7 is about why you should never take your car to a mechanic and you should learn how to fix your car yourself, what are the things you're going to need to defend that argument? And so a book map is going to help you think through all of the pieces that you need to defend your argument in every single chapter, and then on a broad scale for the entire book. So we like to see a book map that identifies the overall transformation, all of the chapters, and all of the stuff that's going in the chapters. And obviously for memoir or narrative nonfiction, what's going to go in the chapters is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be the key scenes that add up to a smaller bit of the transformation in your story. I feel like that's a little complicated to talk about without like a picture, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents on this as a discovery writer is, first of all, your book has a lot for people who are discovery writers. So I think that's important to say. But secondly, as a discovery writer who has written quite a lot of nonfiction, and even for the memoir I wrote, I kind of also think about it as bottom up or top down. And you're doing a top down structure where you're like, it goes this way and then it goes back up. Whereas discovery writers write a ton of stuff and then organize it later. So every single nonfiction book I have written and published, I have not known the structure until I have enough words that suddenly it kind of fell into place. And every single book I have restructured about 3/4 through the project. And so I think that the same thing ends up happening regardless of how you write. But the idea of the book map, so if people listening are like, I'm a discovery writer, what you just said was just too structured, then you can do it later on in the process. But it's actually a really good thing when you start, I say, changing your head from the writer to the reader. Once you switch your head to the reader, you have to structure this.
Exactly. And I think that's part of why my co-author Liz and I believe so strongly in this method, is because it's very reader focused. And a lot of writing teachers come at it from a very author focused perspective there. And there's nothing wrong with that. We firmly believe in the benefits and the power of writing for the benefit of the author. But as professionals who work in the traditional publishing space, again, our bias and our lens is towards that commercial end product, where we are trying to create every single day, and our full-time jobs are to create marketable, successful commercial books. And so if that's the kind of book you want to write, something that has the potential to sell on a broad scale, then you're going to need to think about it from the reader's perspective. And like you said, that knowing that transformation and being able to convey some kind of structure that feels really intuitive to the reader. And actually, I would say often the structure facilitates the reader's understanding of what you're trying to say. That's what you're going to need at some point, whether it comes at the very beginning or even after you write the draft. You're going to need that commercial lens at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just feel that for discovery writers, it just comes later on in the process, but it still has to come. But what's interesting, so you are an acquisitions editor, and this is something that if people are pitching nonfiction differently to fiction, so with fiction, you generally have to have finished the book, right? But with nonfiction, right, people can pitch projects without having written the book. And so what's interesting in the book, you say much of the job is saying no, even to authors, books, and possibilities you think are good. So just tell us a bit more about why editors and agents might say no to book projects.
Sure. Well, on the most basic level, it could just be that it's your project, as wonderful and as amazing as it sounds and as good as your writing is or whatever. It's just not something that we do, or it's just not something that we have the resources to support. So every publisher, to some extent, I would say, except maybe the big five, because they tend to kind of do everything. But even within the big five, there are imprints where they specialize, right? Like there's Portfolio that does like more business type stuff. And then there's Atria that does more of the commercial, interesting, more scientific stuff sometimes. Like there are different imprints that focus on different things, even within the big five. So a really wise literary agent is going to be looking at a proposal and thinking, which imprints or which editors at which publishers specialize in this thing? And those are the people that I'm going to be trying to pitch. So, and an agent themselves will have, here are the things that I'm really passionate about. Here are the things that I love to represent. And here are the connections in my network that I have. So if a literary agent focuses on nonfiction and they get a book of poetry, they might go, well, I just don't have the connections to all of the poetry editors in the industry. So I just can't represent this. So you've got to make sure that whoever you're pitching actually does the thing that you're trying to do. That's kind of at the ground level. But then we can talk about platform. Platform definitely plays a part as well. And I would say there are different platform expectations depending on the publisher, depending on your genre. Like fiction and memoir, platform isn't quite as strong a requirement as it is for like prescriptive nonfiction, because in prescriptive nonfiction, the reader is looking to you as a credible authority. And so if you don't have some kind of proof as a credible authority, it's going to be hard for a publisher to sell your book or an agent to sell your book. So that's something to keep in mind as well. I would also say that often authors have not done enough research to know what other books are already out there that are doing the same thing. So often I reject books because an author comes to me and they're like, this is brilliant. This is groundbreaking. This is going to be like the book that changes the game on X. And I'm like, okay, how is it different from these 5 other books on that same topic? And they don't know, or what they tell me is actually exactly what those other books say. And I'm like, okay, clearly you have not done your research. That is honestly the biggest thing, is that the idea an author is pitching isn't actually new or isn't actually that different from what everyone else is saying. That is one thing that I tell authors over and over again. I'm like, okay, go read your 5 comps and come back and maybe think harder about how you want to offer something new and different to the conversation.
Yeah, and I have a tip for everyone here. If people haven't tried ChatGPT for this, it is so good. If you say, my book is like this book, and this book, please give me a list of 30 more books in this area, it's going to give it to you, and then you can go research them. I find it super, super useful. I've been doing it with a latest folk horror novel, but I find this very useful because I feel like authors struggle with comps because it's pretty research intensive, right? So use the tools where you can.
Yes, that is such good advice. We are big fans of using AI where appropriate and in ways obviously that are ethical, but certainly comps research and even to ask I've been using Blinkist. Do you know Blinkist?
Yeah.
Okay,
That
I've
kind
been
of
using
does summaries, right?
Yes. So I've been using Blinkist. Like if I need to know what is this book about, I need like the top 5 points about it, but I don't really have time to go read a 320-page book. Then I go to Blinkist and see if I can find a really in-depth summary. And even it'll read it out loud to you. So I can almost listen to the summary like a podcast and kind of get, okay, all right, now I know the main gist of this book. And it is so incredibly helpful. So like use your tools absolutely to help you do that research.
So on that, I mean, obviously you mentioned the dreaded word platform, but also said it is important for nonfiction. So what are some of the elements? I feel like there was a period where people really wanted high social media followings. And then I think publishers realized that high following on social media doesn't necessarily translate to high book sales. I don't know, has that changed? Or what are the things that you think nonfiction authors in particular should look for with platform?
Yeah, I think you're right that there has been a softening, I'll say. Like platform is still important. And I still see a lot of agents who, will not work with authors who do not have a platform. And I don't just mean social media. I also mean because sometimes like David Gran, I don't think David Gran's on social media, but you better bet that every agent would love to be his agent and every editor would love to be his editor. But he does have a platform because he's a prolific writer and he's earned his stripes in other ways. So that's the thing with platform is there are lots of ways to build a platform. And so I think nonfiction authors, if social media is not your thing, and I get it because it's not my thing either. I do it because I kind of feel like I have to, which is the same for a lot of authors I know. But you can build your platform in many ways. You can build your platform with speaking engagements or with selling online courses or doing consulting or writing for the New York Times or pitching articles at whatever publications. You can build your platform in a lot of other ways that are not dependent on social media. And I would say that's probably a smart way to build your platform anyways, because social media is fickle and the algorithms change and it's really hard to grow a platform on social media. So I do still see that agents and publishers want a larger platform. They care about it because it is, like I said, it's proof that you can attract an audience to your message. Again, going back to the fact that agents are investors, think about it from if you were looking to invest in something and you've got 2 projects in front of you, one of them is like a really great idea, really great writing, but entirely unknown in the universe versus a project that has a really great idea, really great writing, and they've already got 20,000 subscribers to their newsletter list, and they've already proven that they can sell online courses and they're out speaking. I mean, which one do you think is going to be more successful? Obviously, the second one. So you just have to look at it like agents and editors are investors, and they're going to pick the best bets for potentially getting a return on their investment.
I think that's a good way to think about it. Just on social media, my husband is in corporate and uses LinkedIn a lot. And I feel like there's such a focus in the media industry around book talk and Instagram. But LinkedIn for nonfiction seems to be the very best social network, I guess, to build on. And what are your thoughts on that for nonfiction?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. LinkedIn has a lot of tools that are cool. Like you can do a LinkedIn newsletter. Again, the downside of that is that you're not necessarily able to keep all of your subscribers' email addresses. So that's a downside. I wouldn't be dependent on LinkedIn, but if you can use LinkedIn to grow your network and then use that to convert people to actual email subscribers, that seems like a really, really good way to go. And you're right. That is where a lot of the more professional spaces are. And so if you're a nonfiction author, especially doing prescriptive nonfiction, LinkedIn might be a really good place to build your audience.
And then obviously, I mean, I get a lot of my recommendations from podcasting because I listen to podcasts and I listen to audiobooks in nonfiction as well. And when I'm walking and all of this. So I actually get so many recommendations from podcasting. You have the Hungry Authors podcast, and obviously you're here, you pitched my podcast. So what part do you think podcasting plays in marketing nonfiction? And obviously people don't need to start their own show, but any tips around doing audio?
Yes. I personally think that podcasting is it's such a great way to build your platform because you're able to leverage other people's platforms, right? So to be totally transparent, obviously I pitched you because I'm like, well, I've been following you for over a decade, and I know you've got a great audience already built in. And any nonfiction authors who are listening to you, I want to reach those people. So I'm going to pitch her to go on this podcast. And you don't have to have your own podcast, like you said, to do that. In fact, sometimes I'm like, it's almost better to just be a really frequent guest on other people's podcasts because you're reaching new audiences all the time and you're growing your own audience by utilizing their audiences. So I think it's a super smart strategy for building your platform, building your audience, and getting word about your book out there. It's one of the top things that I recommend to authors all the time, especially when I was ghostwriting book proposals for clients. I would always include podcast section of the book proposal and say, okay, let's identify 20 really likely podcasts that you feel comfortable pitching. And let's promise that you're going to pitch those podcasts when your book comes out. And obviously you don't know yet if they're going to say yes, but that's going to look really attractive to publishers because just like you, so many nonfiction listeners are listening to podcasts because it's an information-based platform and they love reading information. And so if you're selling a prescriptive nonfiction book that is entirely information, then it makes sense to market it on another information-based media.
Yeah, well then on that, I get so many pitches every day at ridiculous number of pitches. I think traditional publishing discovered podcasts and now it's crazy. I mean, I get them from big publishers every day for books that are completely irrelevant to my show. So when a pitch like yours arrives, I obviously am interested. And so what tips can you give people for pitching in a way that makes the podcast host go, yes, please?
Yeah. So I always start by identifying the podcasts that your complementary authors have been on. So, right. So if you say, okay, these are my top 5 comp books, and by comp, I mean complementary or competing or comparative books, whatever you want comp to be short for, identify those top books and then look at the podcasts that those authors have been on. Those are going to be your most likely podcasts to start pitching. And you can say in your query to them, hey, you had this person on. For a writing podcast, I might say oh, hey, you had Jane Friedman on your podcast, or you had Joanna Penn on your podcast, or you had AJ Harper on your podcast. And guess what? I'm friends with that person and we have a lot of things in common. And I've written a similar book and I think it might appeal to your audience in these ways. So being really careful about podcasts that you pitch is the first part, just like with pitching agents and editors, pitch the right people. And then using some kind of personal connection like that is really, really helpful too. I am acquainted with the person that you've already interviewed, or we have some kind of connection. I find that works really well too, is finding a point of connection, or even being able to say hey, I'm a big fan. I'm genuinely a big fan of yours. And that is obviously very, very complimentary to people and tends to soften the awkwardness potentially of a cold email. And then being really explicit about how your information or your topic can benefit their listeners. So that's the key thing too. I like to, in any cold query that I'm making, just do kind of a bulleted list of here are the things that I can talk about that I think your listeners would love to learn about. And hopefully that's gonna seal the deal for you. So
yeah, I think that
helps.
Yeah, that bullet list of how your book has specific topics that my audience will like. That is the key, because it's just incredible how many pitches I get, mainly from traditional publishing now, and they are just a press release about a book. Yeah. And that's not a pitch, but they're using the email to pitch the podcast. They're like, do you want to interview this author? And then they put in a press release about a book. And I guess, like you were saying, a lot of the time you don't have time to read the whole book. Like with your book, I've scanned through it. Obviously, I didn't read every single line, but I went through it and looked at little bits of it and pulled out quotes and things. But it seems to me so often when people are pitching is they don't put themselves in the position of the podcaster or the podcast host. And so again, it's so funny because it echoes what you were saying earlier around thinking about what the reader wants from a book, or an editor wants, or an acquisitions person wants. So it's always, I guess, the big tip is putting yourself in the position of the person on the other end.
That's right. Yeah, that is exactly right. It's such an important skill. And with pitching, like publicists sending you a cold query and just including the press release, I would say that's just a factor of like, they just don't have a lot of time because they are trying to pitch several books to so many people. And it does take time to really put together a thoughtful query and a thoughtful pitch. And so for myself, I guess this is another tip. I tend to block out like, okay, I'm going to do an hour and I'm just going to do 5 pitches. My goal in that hour is to do 5 pitches, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually when you are taking the time to put a lot of thought into a query and really customize it for whoever's receiving that query, it does take time. And so certainly with podcasting and definitely with pitching books, you're going to want to take some time to be really thoughtful about how you're making a query, because like you said, it really makes a difference to the person who's receiving it. And you're wanting that person to say yes to you. So it's worth the time to make sure that they're going to really enjoy receiving your query.
Yes, so it is a super useful book, very well organized, and I think people will find it useful. So where can people find you and the book and everything else online?
Yeah, so you can find everything that we do on hungryauthors.com. We've got the podcast, which we mentioned. We also do online cohorts a couple times a year. We have obviously the book, and then you can follow us on social media at Hungry Authors as well.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Ariel. That was great.
Thank you so much, Joanna.
So I hope you found the discussion with Ariel interesting, and it's always good to hear the perspective of someone who works in the publishing industry in terms of the business angle on things. I've also found the non-fiction side of me starting to feel like it needs some stretching, so I might be doing some more of that too. As ever, I love to hear your thoughts about the interview or about anything I talk about in the intro. Please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel, message me on X at thecreativepenn, or email me, Joanna at thecreativepenn.com. Send me pictures of where you're listening or your favourite cemetery or graveyard. You know I love those too. Next Monday, I'm talking about writing historical fiction and non-fiction and marketing as a hybrid author with Emily E.K. Murdoch. And also remember my Kickstarter for Blood Vintage, which has an option for the Discovery Writing webinar, runs until the 15th of October 2024. So head on over for a look, and it is at jfpenn.com/Blood Vintage. In the meantime, happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You can find the backlist episodes and show notes at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. And you can get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook and X at The Creative Penn, or on Instagram and Facebook at JFPennAuthor. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time.